It's a real honor to have Josh Bersin today. He's a well-known industry analyst, educator, and thought leader on everything around HR and leadership. Josh, welcome aboard. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. Hopefully you're doing okay in the crazy world called California.
Yeah, thank you, Vinnie. It's a strange week. We have all these fires here, and I told you the sky turned orange yesterday, so I'm living through that. I'm doing fine. I had a little bit of, stuff on my skin from being the age that I am, but that's normal. And as you know, HR and the workplace and work and homework and technology is so big in the pandemic right now that it's actually a very fascinating time to be part of this industry. And as you know, there's many things to talk about. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, let's jump into it. Josh, we've seen, in all the doom and gloom, we've actually seen a lot of what I call acrobatics, right? Obviously the healthcare heroics, but, auto companies jumping in, trying to make ventilators, distilleries making hand sanitizers, all kinds of last mile logistics heroics. I mean, we've stayed fed and clothed and everything at home. So a lot of positive, a lot of really vibrant business models and so on. What, you're in touch with HR people all the time. Talk about some heroics you've seen either in the HR realm or in the leadership realm.
Well, it's been, I think heroic is the word I would use. For most of us, somewhere around February or March, there was this recognition that maybe there was something serious going on. And then, of course, there was a continuous, maybe over a couple of weeks, realization that was bigger and bigger and bigger than we thought. And so most companies quickly came to action, in HR particular, in people in particular, as well as people in facilities and IT, and said, wow, where is everybody? Who's on planes? Who's affected? Who's sick? Who's got kids at home? Who has parents at home? That was first. Then, how do we support them at home, and how do we give them the tools and the information, the security systems, the computers so they can work at home? And then very soon after that was, whoa, everybody's stressed out, anxious, worried. There's the issues of resilience and well-being, and people aren't getting enough exercise, and maybe we need to give them help on that. Then there was, what about the leadership model? What about, our managers, our supervisors? How are they going to be, how are they going to deal with their teams when their teams are going through so much stress? By the way, maybe we need people in new jobs. I mean, we're doing a case study of a company right now where 60% of the employees got new jobs in the last 45 days. And all of those are the types of things that most HR people would spend 6 months or a year working on before they rolled anything out. But we didn't have any time. So all of those things happened in a couple of months. And now we're at the point where companies are saying, not only are we continuously adapting to the ever-changing nature of the virus and where people are affected, but we now have a new business model. We have new products and services. We're interacting with customers in new ways. We've redesigned our workplace. We've redesigned our stores. We've redesigned our restaurants, wherever it may be. And all of this has happened in 6 or 7 months. So the HR people that I've talked to are completely, leaning into this. We have calls every week. We have 6 sprints of groups. We have about 300 or 400 companies that we're talking to every week for an hour. People are dialing in, sharing what they're working on. There is no playbook on a lot of this. Some of these are beginning to become well understood issues, but so the enthusiasm, the excitement, the willingness to partner with IT, facilities, legal, finance, other groups of the company, and then the ability to learn is just amazing. And the thing that I'm maybe reflecting on now is, for people in HR, the reason they're in HR, usually, some people are a little bit different, but most people are in HR because they love the people part of the business. So they've spent their entire career thinking about human issues, emotional issues, psychology, and all of the data and science around that. Now they get to use all that in a really badly needed crisis. And so I think it is heroic, and most of the CHROs I talk to are just having an amazing time career-wise. Now they're working a lot of extra hours, and people are kind of working all the time, but that's part of what we're dealing with.
That's great to hear, because my question would have been, are they stressed out? Obviously they're stressed out, but they seem to be.
They are, but there's a you could draw a picture of this, but there are periods of your life, and I've certainly been through this, when stress, it's all mostly good. And I think most people are under a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty, but there's also a lot of forgiveness. There's so much ambiguity in what is going to be the right answer that companies are willing to say, look, just do it and we'll fix it as we roll it out. We never would have done that before. So there's a lot of tolerance for agility in solutions now. And most companies are telling me, this stuff's working. Whatever it is we tried, it worked. And the parts of it that didn't work, we just fixed it. So we don't have to read a book on Agile to figure out how to be Agile.
Josh, I've done about 60 of these interviews across industries, across operational areas.
Yeah.
And every one of them has been positive, stressed out, but positive and optimistic. It is so different than what the media is reporting. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, the difference between business executives and.
I was just listening to the news this morning. There's all this talk about the economic collapse and all that. We did not have a recession. We did not have an economic recession. We had a healthcare crisis, but people were still buying things. They were still going online and entertaining themselves. They were still eating. I mean, there are people that lost their jobs. And many of them have been supported by the government and they're going back to work. But these companies we're talking to, they're still running. They're adapting and transforming very, very fast. So I completely agree with you.
So Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, made a comment a few weeks ago. He says, is this a pandemic or an epidemic? He says, it started off with a healthcare crisis, then became an economic crisis. Then we hit the diversity crisis, the Black Lives Matter and all that.
Yeah.
How is HR? I mean, clearly the stress from the first two crises are bad enough. How have they adjusted to the diversity issue? Are they coping well, or is that kind of still?
It's a very, very painful issue. We have a bunch of chief diversity officers in our groups, and they are very, very pained by this. It's not a new topic, and it's not a new problem, but the urgency and the situations that are being raised about diversity are very upsetting. And we have the President of the United States weighing into this. We have the Black Lives Matter issues, the police violence stuff, and of course, all the issues with lack of diversity in leadership and pay. I mean, the Twitter, the Pinterest chief operating officer situation comes out in the middle of this. They are working extremely hard. In fact, it's interesting. One of the fastest growing jobs in LinkedIn and Indeed is chief diversity officers. Every company's decided we got to hire somebody to do this. Now, it's a really hard job, and just by hiring somebody into that job, you don't fix the problem. So it's actually a stressful job for the people that have it. But these are people that spend their whole lives dealing with this issue. They're very sensitive to all the different dimensions of belonging and inclusion and diversity, and they are, they're sort of unhappy about their situation in the world. But it is an opportunity because companies really want to lean into it. So I think the pandemic is exposing every little weak point in business that we didn't deal with during the economic growth cycle, and now they're all exposed. So they're all coming out.
Interestingly on that, I interviewed Tony Profit, who is the Chief Equality Officer at Salesforce, and then Charles Phillips, who, a Black executive, a very prominent Black executive.
Yeah.
And when you talk to corporate executives, I think the sense is, look, we're trying really hard. When you walk on the street, though, I don't get the same sense. I think there's a huge gap between what is happening in corporate America and what is happening on Main Street. So,
well, my opinion, I live in Oakland. I live in a very racially diverse community. I mean, the problem of, particularly for Black people, but for many others too, the problem of racial disparities and income inequality, and even the virus is affecting minorities in different ways than it is other people, is a societal problem. Businesses are not going to solve society's problems, but we have to solve the problems in our companies too. So we have to do the best we can. So I think, the chief diversity officers and CEOs in corporations are doing a noble effort, but what the rest of the society has to deal with it too. So, that's why it's such a complex problem.
Josh, so the pandemic has been very uneven, right? Like you say, certain communities affected more than others. But from a corporate perspective, some of them are doing amazingly well, right? Anil Butchery told me they ran a 1 million person payroll in the middle of the pandemic, right? It's probably a big company that all of us know, but he didn't want to name it. Mortgage.
He was bragging about Workday.
Well, we can speculate. You look at mortgage banking, it's just on fire, right? You look at last mile delivery, on fire. So some segments are doing extremely well. Others, like airlines, commercial real estate, and so on, not quite so well. So, and obviously the question is about employment brand, right? So some are hiring in 30, 40, 50,000 chunks. Others are having mass layoffs. How are HR people behaving here? Because I would think brands are made or tarnished in this time frame, probably even more acutely than ever before.
Yeah, first of all, I agree on the economy. Roughly 20-25% of the companies we've recently studied are going through a pretty significant disruption financially. But I think there's a pretty good consensus amongst all of the HR executives I talk to, and presumably their CEOs, that now is not the time to treat people poorly. You end up paying for it later, and I think most people know that. There have been a lot of studies that have been done on layoffs, for example, that show that companies that go through significant layoffs often never recover the situation they were in before financially because it takes so long to build back up the skills and the brand. There's also been studies done in the aerospace industry where roughly 1 in 4 aerospace engineers are laid off say, quote, "I will never work for that company again." So there's a lot of data out there on why you have to treat people well, even if you are downsizing. And so, I was on the phone with Sabre, for example, the airline folks. They did a lot of furloughing. They had no business for a while. It just stopped. So they furloughed a lot of people, but they maintained their benefits. They kept their health care. And so the employees, they understood. They said, "Look, we know you guys can't pay us if you don't have any money. But if you help us with our personal lives, we'll be around when the business comes back." So I think there's also this job swapping stuff going on. Verizon is taking people that are out of work and putting them into a pool of people that other companies can hire when they need them, and then they'll come back later. There's some pretty innovative thinking going on. So I think we're in a very empathetic period in the case of most CEOs that I talk to, and most certainly HR people.
That's great to hear, because I don't think the last recession we saw that. So it's good to see HR people are a lot more empathetic.
Well, that's because I think this is not sort of a typical economic recession. Everybody knows this is a personal health crisis too. So I think there's a totally different strategy and mentality to it, and also a lot of companies are growing, like you said. A lot of companies realize, gee, if we just get ourselves reconfigured well, like Pizza Hut, we can sell pizzas. We just can't sell them the way we used to.
Yep. Josh, I've been talking to a number of operational executives, and I don't think I've heard this much automation talk. So companies talking about bringing jobs back from Asia, but they go, it won't be 100%. It'll be maybe 30 to 40%. We just can't afford U.S. salaries. So there's going to be a lot more automation when we bring it back. People are talking about drone deliveries. People are talking about autonomous trucks. I mean, there's a lot more conversation around automation. historically, I found HR doesn't seem to be that leading the charge in automation. Operational people do, right? Plant managers do, R&D folks do, and so on. Are you seeing a change here at all, or are they still being very human-centric and almost fighting automation?
Well, there's a, if you go back and think about HR long before I was in HR, the history of HR is basically administration, payroll, personnel stuff. And so HR professionals have become more business consulting oriented year by year. I mean, 10 years ago, there were no people didn't even know statistics other than IO psychologists. A lot of HR people didn't even know a lot of math. Now, so every year HR becomes more of a business consulting organization. And I think we're in the stage now where work design, well, first of all, sending people home to work is not just sending them home. That's a job design problem and a work design problem and a management redesign problem. So most HR people are realizing a big part of their job is redesigning the work around the workplace changes or the machines. So I think that automation, even though it kind of was an IT operational thing, has now found its way into the domain of HR. We have a program in our academy on the role of AI in HR, and it's just flooded with people talking about situations at work and how they redesign the human processes around it. Because what automation seems to be doing, from all the research I've done, is it's not eliminating jobs, it's creating more service roles around the machines, creating a need for new skills, more human skills, what I call power skills. So it falls right into HR's lap anyway. So I think HR is getting, even though a lot of HR people are not experts in RPA and stuff, they're very cognizant of the job redesign that's going on.
Well, more positive news then. Let's talk about another skill set HR is being forced to learn. As they reopen facilities, they're having to do all kinds of distancing, thermometer checks, disinfectant information. I mean, just a whole bunch of biotech and medical skills, right? So, A, how are they coping? And secondly, were you surprised that someone like Salesforce, not an HR vendor, came up with something like Work.com to help companies with reopen protocols and so on?
Well, yeah, first of all, in terms of HR, the thing that 2 or 3 things have happened. First is well-being crawled out of the benefits department and went and landed in the boardroom. So the HR people now have all become very aware of their role in understanding and improving all aspects of well-being. So last year it was, yoga classes and exercise and diet and fitness. This year it's health, safety, virus protection, and social distancing. So this is not the beginning of HR's journey into personal health. I mean, companies have had industrial safety departments for many years. If you go to an oil company or a utility, they've had huge departments on this. So this is now becoming a generic set of skills that all HR people have to have. And we're actually building a program in our academy on public health for HR people to give them even more information on this. It's really going to be cool. It'll come out before the end of the year. And then I forgot what the other question was.
The other question was, I would have thought some HR vendors would be.
Oh, the vendors. Yeah, well, I mean,
Salesforce launched Work.com, right?
Yeah, I think Work.com, what ServiceNow has done, Workday's doing this, SAP's doing this. This is a relatively easy to solve tech problem. Getting people to attest if they're sick every day, getting them to give you information on their personal, health and their temperature, locating where they are, and then using that information to tell them which office to go to. Oh, that office is full, you should go to this office. That's not very hard for tech guys to do. The ServiceNow guys put together their apps in 2 or 3 weeks. They actually shut down all of their engineering and they moved into this area and they built all these apps out, and all these companies have bought them. I'm sure Salesforce did the same thing. And the other thing that's interesting that's happening is people are creating these mashup applications themselves. I was on the phone with a hamburger chain in the UK that's using Workplace by Facebook, which is something people probably don't even think about that much. And they created a mashup application where an employee can go on their phone, use Google Maps to tell the system where they're located. It will then say, oh, well, you're certified to have these different roles. If you want to go to a local store to work and you don't want to take public transportation, here are 3 shifts you can take that are within walking or bicycling distance of your house. They built it themselves on these tools. So all of this tech that companies have been investing in for years in HR is now turning out to be really useful for this. And the big vendors, that are smart have figured out, wow, there's a big business here for us. And so they're building these things.
Well, again, it's good to see the HR domain keep expanding there. Thanks to your academy, I guess. Let's talk about leadership. You obviously follow leadership, and there's all kinds of organizational theories on we need a wartime leader for this, or we need a more empathetic leader. What examples of resilience and just confident leadership you've seen in the last few months? Any that stand out?
Well, lots and lots of things. I think the most interesting thing that maybe I'll just mention in leadership that comes out of both conversations and data, we're going to be publishing a research report on business resilience, is caring for employees' families. Family care was always kind of a benefit that was somewhere in the benefits program. There were certain EAPs and different things available from insurance companies about families. We're now finding that understanding people's family situations and family needs is one of the biggest differentiators of the higher performing companies, because so many people are working at home, or they have kids that can't go to school, or they have parents or kids that are maybe, millennials that move back in the house, that understanding and caring for families is kind of a leadership issue. Most business guys or gals didn't think about that when they went into business. So I'm going to help people with their family issues. But now they're realizing they have to do that. So for example, one of the companies, a big pharmaceutical company we talked to, is not only, giving people money and support services, they're teaching classes for kids at home. They were hired teachers to teach on behalf of the company for the employees' kids who are not in school because they couldn't go to school. They're giving the employees free access to all of the learning programs in Coursera and other vendors that they have, which is actually pretty expensive. They're giving it to all of their family members. They're doing things like that. And I think those are kind of a sort of an angle of leadership that a lot of hard-nosed business people didn't realize was actually a pretty important part of their jobs. So that's one example.
Josh, in the beginning of the pandemic, I was hearing about kids Zoom bombing and so on. The last month, I've heard a number of people say multi-generational family issues, right? Especially in certain ethnic groups. People are realizing that people have parents at home, elderly at home too, and that is another issue to factor. So, yeah, it whole new world. Josh, let's talk about justifying investment in HR, because what I'm hearing from a number of companies is a lot of investment is going towards what I call edge applications, vertical edge applications, which is helping them generate new revenue. So telemedicine in healthcare, or PPP loan processing in banking, because so many 5 million PPP loans were approved, right? Or Shopify helping companies with small merchants with not go through Amazon, do their last mile delivery and order processing and so on. And on and on and on. So companies are investing in that quite a bit. When you talk to CIOs, they're like, my God, I got to save money. So they're looking at optimization projects. How does HR justify itself, investments for itself, given these two extremes of focus?
Well, when I first started thinking about the pandemic, I wrote a big piece on the big reset, and I sort of incorrectly predicted that there were going to be a lot of budget cuts and a lot of reallocation of resources, but actually that didn't happen. I think what most companies realized was if our people aren't well taken care of, we don't have a company. So I have not heard HR people telling me their budgets are being slashed. Now they're being reallocated, and the 5-year implementation of XYZ system may be pushed out for a year. Maybe we're not going to work on that right now. But I think spending money on employee benefits, programs, support, training, education, facilitation, the tools like the back to work tools we were talking about, there seems to be no lack of money for that right now. And that's because this isn't, look, the stock market did some pretty wacky stuff, but it isn't like that kind of a recession where all the demand dried up. The consumer demand for services is still there. So I think most CEOs and CFOs, except for airlines, of course, there's a few industries that are just basically in a bit of a crisis, but most companies are saying, look, the demand is going to come back sometime in the next 6, 9, 12 months. We have got to take care of these people or we're not going to be ready. So I don't think we had that kind of massive budget cut that I would have predicted. And, and I think that's part of, the rethinking of leadership in this new kind of a situation.
Well, let's stay on the technology point. So cloud applications did much better than on-premise applications during the pandemic, right? Because people didn't have to provision new VPN sockets, and the on-premise just didn't scale up or down pretty well. What do we do now? Do we move on-premise HR to cloud? Can people justify it? Because quite often those are the 5-year projects you're talking about. Not that easy to do. Or I'm hearing another strategy, which is let's lift and shift them to a hyperscaler like a Google or an Amazon, and maybe move to third-party maintenance. So let's not try to get away from legacy anytime soon, but let's get the cloud scalability, the cloud security, and so on. How do you think is that a strategy you're hearing about?
My situations, I don't usually talk to the IT people, I talk to the HR people. Most of the big HR tech projects are still alive and well. Everybody knows they need to modernize their cloud or their HCM platforms. What I think has changed a lot though in the last year or two is even the best run vendors, Workday, SAP, Oracle, all of them, they can't do everything. So, ServiceNow is obviously playing a huge role. Microsoft Teams is turning into an HR platform for certain areas. Facebook Workplace is turning into an HR platform for certain things. All the learning vendors. So what I see the problem in HR is, yes, we need to move to the cloud. Yes, we need an HCM platform. But wow, we got a bunch of other things too that we got to talk about. The recruiting stuff, the assessment stuff, the back to work stuff, all of these other tools. And I don't see the projects getting canceled. I mean, I'm sort of surprised. Most of them are saying, look, we still need to do this. We're not going to do it quite as quickly as we did before because we have to deal with these back to work issues right now. But those are still going on. So I think that the pattern towards the cloud is pretty much the same, but in a much more hybrid way. The thing that I don't know a lot about, you may know more about this, is these country-specific national clouds where countries are saying, we need all the data in our country. I mean, that could really upset the cloud marketplace a lot. I don't know how quickly that's happening, but all of these vendors are now setting up, country-specific implementations of their clouds to try to deal with these national issues. And I think that's, these big giant corporations, they have to think about that. So that's a new wrinkle.
Well, I think the good news on that is it's 3 or 4 big countries, China, Germany, India, that are probably more demanding of that. Yeah. And the world is much bigger than just that. So let's continue on the technology thread. What does it mean for traditional payroll outsourcing? What does it mean for, generally, what macro changes do you see in the HR landscape? Technology landscape?
The big change in HR tech, payroll is always going to be an outsourced function because it's so complicated. But I mean, the big sort of existential change is most of us are not tolerant of difficult to use technology anymore. I mean, we used to have to use it, so we had no choice. I mean, I remember the first time I had to use Siebel. Nobody knew how to use it, but we had no choice. Now people just don't use stuff if it doesn't work well. They just sort of stay away from it. So all of these systems are becoming experiential, consumer interface like, smarter. I mean, all the vendors are building, chatbot front ends, voice front ends, more predictive, more personalization into them. And that's actually a big heavy lift for these vendors. I mean, they have a lot of back end stuff to build too. So that's why I think there's kind of a new breed of experience platforms sitting on top. And, most of the bigger companies I talk to, I was just on the phone with somebody yesterday, said, look, we have, Workday or whatever it was for our back end. What should we put in front of our users? They ask me, tell me. I mean, because we know Workday can't do everything. I don't really have an answer to that. And, some of this is, I think, re-engineering HR tech from the phone backwards instead of from the bottom up. It's from the user down. And that's taking place over a period of years now. And that's, to me, the biggest change that's going on in the market.
Well, Josh, that's a lot of thoughts right there. Any final words for HR professionals or fellow peers?
I think, the one thing I would say to HR people is you're going to look back on the year 2020 and 2021, and you're going to say, wow, I learned a lot that year. We did a lot of things that we didn't think we could do. We got more work done than we realized we could ever accomplish. We became better connected to the organization, to the company. We became better connected to IT, better connected to facilities, better connected to legal and finance. So this is actually a big growing up process for HR. It's also very stressful. You're going to have to deal with things you didn't really know a lot about, like D&I, health and safety. I mean, but that's okay. That's the reason you're there. So I think most HR people will look back on this as an inspirational time in their careers when they were given a seat at the table and nobody could tell them how to do what they did. And they just said, here, take care of this work at home problem, take care of this scheduling problem. And they kind of strapped themselves in and took care of it. So I think it's a really good time for the profession from that standpoint, despite all the issues we're facing.
Josh, that is amazingly positive. Thank you for your service. Your academy is obviously coaching them through all these new topics and complex topics. But thanks for being positive. It's good to hear a smiley face talking optimistically about things in this doom and gloom. So thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Vinnie.
And stay safe from those fires.
Yep. Well, hopefully it'll pass soon.